So I'm also going to talk about infants' representation of the abstract relation same and different. And I'm going to address 2 points. So the first question is whether indeed both relations are represented in infancy, so same and different, or only the representation of the relation same. And then I'll try to begin the exploration of what this representation might be like. That is what could be the format of these representations. First, I think all the results that are published so far in the literature do not show yet representation of the relation different. That is, I think all the results could still be explained with only a relation same. And why is that so? Well, because when an experimenter is designing an experiment to teach infants something about different, typically we're contrasting the relation different with the relation same. So for instance, in a non-matched sample, this is what you have here, we can teach infants to choose the stimulus that is different from a reference rather than the stimulus that is the same. Or in a different design, we can teach infants to choose the pair of stimuli that are different rather than the pair of stimuli that are the same. And so when we do this, infants always have the possibility to learn not something about different, but something about same. So they can learn basically to avoid the stimulus that are different, that are the same, sorry, rather than to choose the ones that are different. And in fact, when this kind of strategy is not possible, and we've seen, we've shown in a recent paper that this is actually what infants do in a non-matched sample, and Zental and colleagues have shown that is what pigeons do in a non-matched sample as well. And in situations where this kind of strategy is not available, there are situations where infants succeed with same but fail with different. So at this point, I think what the literature shows is that same is represented by young infants and probably even by neonates, but we don't know much about the representation of a relation different, apart from the fact that same is more salient and easier to represent. So the experiment I'm going to show now is trying to, just like Judith's work, to be inspired by the work of Gary Marcus from 1999 and people who followed on it, try to teach a structure to infants that relies on both the relation same and different. And the paradigm that we're using is a noteball paradigm using pupillometry. So this is the paradigm that I'm going to use in all the experiments that I'm going to show you today. So infants are placed in front of an eye tracker, and on the screen of the eye tracker there is a cross that is blinking like this, and that attracts infants' attention. When infants look at this central cross, the trial starts. When the trial starts, there is this little guy that appears on the screen and starts jumping like this. It's the same guy, the same video that appears in every single trial. So there's absolutely no visual difference in any of the trials. What matters is the syllable sequence that infants hear. And this is important because it means that any difference that we might observe in the pupil diameter, which is what we're going to measure, can only be due to the processing of the auditory stimuli and not to any visual differences, especially no difference of luminance. So in a given experiment, we will have one structure of this syllable sequence that will be common to most of the trials, to 75% of the trials. And then in 25% of the trials, we're going to violate this structure. The idea is that if infants are representing the standard structure, a violation will increase their attention, that will surprise them, and this should be observable as a dilation of the pupil. All right, so here is the experiment that we've run to address the question of the representation of the relation different. So here we have 4 types of sequences, and they're all equiprobable, 25% of the trials each. The first 3, though, have something common in them, that is that the final syllable is different from the previous ones. So infants might hear 4 same syllable and a final different one, that is ba, 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 ko, or 3 same and a different one, that is ko, 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 si, or 2 same and different, le, ra, and in 25% of the trials, we are violating this general structure by having only 4 same syllables, di, 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 di. Okay. So the idea is that if infants are expecting all the sequences to end with a different syllable, they should be surprised when that kind of sequence occurs. Okay? And surprise, again, is measured as a pupil dilation. Now, one thing to stress about this paradigm, though, is that we cannot compare sequences of different duration. There are different reasons for that, but the main reason is that as long as there are auditory stimuli, this influence the pupil diameter, this influence attention and therefore pupil diameter. So the only sequences that we can compare here are the 4-syllable sequences, so AAAB and AAAA. And so those are the results of this experiment. So what I'm plotting here is the variation of the pupil diameter with respect to a baseline that is taken here, that is 500 milliseconds before the final syllable. Okay. And so in red, you have the deviant stimuli, and in blue, the standard stimuli AAAB. And so what you can see is that infants, we find a pupil dilation for the deviant stimuli, suggesting that infants are surprised when they hear AAAA. What's interesting is that this actual sequence of syllables is not, does occur, for instance, here, right? So it's not illegal per se. What is illegal is the absence of the different syllable. So that really suggests that infants are able to represent this structure, that is, the sequence should end with a different syllable. So they are representing the relation different here. And we've replicated this result in a larger group and in a different lab, so it holds. Okay, so to answer the first question, are both relations represented in infancy, same and different? Well, the answer is yes, at least at 11 months in this paradigm, we can find evidence for both same and different. Now, second question, what are these representations like? In this section of the talk, I will focus now only on the relation same. And so therefore asking, how do infants represent a sequence of same syllables? And more specifically, the hypothesis I wanted to address is that infants might represent one symbol per syllable. That is, an example of such a representation would be something like this, where two same syllables could be represented. So the structure, two same syllables, would be represented as XX, where X is a variable for the syllables. Okay, so the representation XX will apply to Baba, to Coco, to Sisi, etc., but that would not apply to Kile, okay, because the two syllables here are not the same. Now, the interesting thing with that kind of representation is that this should be limited by working memory. That is, there should be a limit in the number of same syllables that you can represent if you have to represent each of the syllables. And so that makes the prediction that maybe 3 same or 4 same are representable by young infants, but at some point this should break down. And so the prediction I'm making is that maybe 6 same would not work. So maybe infants would be unable to represent a sequence such as 6 same. And so this is what we're going to test in these experiments. So here is the first experiment where we are asking whether infants can represent 4 same, the structure of 4 same. So now in 75% of the, so let's look at the experimental group first. In 75% of the trials, infants hear 4 same syllables. So again, the syllable vary from one trial to another. Okay, so they might hear ba, 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 then se, then lu, 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 etc. And then in 25% of the trials, we are violating this structure by presenting a final different syllable. So for instance, ku, 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 le. Okay, and we want to see whether infants are surprised when this happens. Now, one worry is that the sequence ku, 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 le, or any 3 same syllable and 1 different, might elicit surprise per se because there is a local change between 2 syllables. Okay, so we know, for instance, that that kind of sequence would elicit a mismatch negativity in the EEG signal in adults. So to see whether the effect that we might observe in the experimental group is only due to this kind of local change, we run a control group where we use the same sequences, the same types of sequences, but now there are no standard or deviant sequences. They're all equiprobable. So 50% of 4 same syllables and 50% of 3 same and 1 different. So the idea is that if the effect that we measure, that we might measure here is only due to a local change, we should find exactly the same thing in the control group. Okay. So those are the results of these experiments. So here, what I've highlighted in gray is the significant interaction between the experimental group and the control group. That is that we do find significant pupil dilation in the experimental group, but there's no significant differences in the control group. So this shows that this reaction here is not due to the local chain, but is due to the violation of the global structure. What is this global structure? 4 same syllables. Okay, so infants here show the ability to represent 4 same as a structure. Now, the question is whether they can represent 6 same. Okay, so the design of the experiment is exactly the same, except that now we have 6 syllables. Okay, so 6 same as a standard sequence, and 5 same, 1 different as a deviant sequence, and 50% of each type in the control group. And so here are the results directly. So here we find no interaction, but we find a significant main effect. That is that infants show pupil dilation in both the experimental group and in the control group. So that can be interpreted as a well, that shows that there is a local effect, right? So just the sequence AAAAAB is eliciting pupil dilation already. And when there is also a violation of a more global structure, like 6 same, this does not increase that pupil dilation. So that means that we can explain the whole pattern here by just this local effect. But there is one worry, is that maybe this local effect is hiding a more the representation of the global structure, right? We could imagine, for instance, that the pupil dilation is saturating, and that it is not possible to observe here a major pupil dilation than here. So this result is somehow still ambiguous. I mean, for sure, it does not show evidence for the representation of 6 same, but it does not yet allow to conclude about the absence of that representation. Now, the reasoning at this point is that actually infants cannot represent 6 same because they cannot represent 6. So if they were to succeed in this experiment, what they would represent, in fact, is not really 6 same, but more something like all same. So representing that this is a sequence of syllables of a unknown number, or at least unknown exact number, where all the syllables are the same. Okay. And so the idea was, in the next experiment, to directly probe for this representation of all same. And so this is how we did that, again, by just variating the number of syllables. Okay, so now in 75% of the trials, infants hear a sequence of only same syllables, but they can be 5 same syllables, 4 same syllables, or 3 same syllables. And then in 25% of the trials, we have 3 same syllable and 1 different. Okay, so as before, we can compare only the sequences of 4 syllables. And those are the results that we obtain here. We find no significant, not even non-significant pupil dilation in this experiment. So there is really no evidence here that infants can represent the sequence all same, which suggests that in the previous experiment, this is really just the local effect that we see here, and really no ability to represent the structure of these 6 same sequences. So at this point, I want to argue that 11-month-olds can represent 4 same, but not 6 same, and that there's no trace of an ability to represent all same. And so these limits, I think, suggest that the format of representation that infants are using is 1 symbol per syllable. So again, something like an operation of variables, so where same would be represented as the repetition of 1 variable that stands for a syllable. And in that case, keeping with this format of representation, we need to enrich that a little bit for a representation of different. And I think different would need to be represented as something like this, that is x, not x, right? So we might need some kind of negation here. So to conclude, infants are able to represent same and different. And I think, at least in this paradigm, in these experiments, the format of the representations that infants use is not that of adults. Why? Because they don't represent all same, adults can, and they don't solve the relation match to sample, adults can. So I think the results so far point towards a discontinuity along development. And in fact, I did not have time to present more results today, but with a completely different paradigm, though, we have evidence only around 4 or 5 years of age that children can solve the relational match to sample and represent all same. So we have this gap at this point between 11 months olds and 4 or 5 year olds that we need to explain and to understand better the type of representation that are play at each age. Thank you. So, by the way, I'm half deaf, so please speak loud for the questions.
Is it on? Hi, thank you. So I was wondering about this with regards to the previous talk as well, that I'm thinking that perhaps these tasks can be solved in a non-representational format as well, and I'm thinking about something like repetition suppression, like in Cal Friston's format, that there is the same, different. So it's something... Thanks. So it's something like that the baby need not represent same and different in terms of concepts, but it's something that your brain will respond in a repetition suppression structure. So you mentioned mismatch negativity, which is a response that works in coma as well, as far as I know, or in a sleeping newborn. So I think that maybe it's a more parsimonious explanation to suppose that we're talking about a repetition suppression thing, that B, and then they respond to that, which doesn't have to go with a representation per se.
That's a fair point. So I have several things to say about it. First of all, I think the paradigm that we're using, actually the measure that we're using, that is pupil dilation, is an argument against this interpretation, because you just refer to coma patients. So for instance, the kind of response we're measuring here would be absent in coma patients and is also absent in sleeping normal people, right? So we have results with adults that show that to get the pupil dilation in that kind of paradigm, you need to be consciously processing this paradigm. Now to about repetition suppression. I mean, repetitions. What's important here is that we are first for the first experiment when we show the representation of different. Here you have to see that what infants are responding to is the absence of the change, right? So that to me really means that they expect a change. And I am willing to call this expectation of a change a representation of different, or at least that it signals a representation of different. But I agree that we have to work on the different models and understand better what kind of alternative models could explain this result. But at this point, that would be my position.
I was wondering if you carried out the last experiments about the representational format change with adults. So perhaps we have a different experience, but I wonder what the pupils would tell.
I haven't done it with adults yet. Well, we've done a simpler version with adults. So again, with adults, you have to tell them really to pay attention to the structure, to consciously pay attention to the structure. Otherwise, you don't see much. That's too boring, I think, for others, basically. But what is sure is that for others to represent exactly 6 same, you have to count, right? And for the last experiment where we varied the number of, I mean, this is not an experiment, but subjectively, when you listen to the sequences, it's obvious that there are always same syllables, and that. So if you pay attention to the structure, I think it really jumped to your ears. But I haven't run the experiment yet.
Hi. Is it on? Yeah. Sorry. I really like the pattern of results. It's very interesting. I was just curious. I saw is it that the time courses were very different in some of the experiments, and especially this one that you have on. Yeah. I was just curious, why would it take 2.5 seconds for this surprise reaction to So I have I think a good explanation for this. So typically in this paradigm, when we have
just a simple change. So for instance, if we always have ba, 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 just ba, 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 we do never change the syllables, and then at some point we say ba, 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 di, the pupil dilation peaks around 1500 milliseconds. Okay. What's happening here, so the normal timing is 1500 milliseconds. This is what we have in the experiments about same, right? So this is what we see here, right? So here the peak start. I mean, we have a first peak at 1500 and a second one a bit later. What is happening in the first experiment, the one about different, is that infants cannot know. Well, I'm looking for the. Sorry. So that's another example. Sorry. Infants cannot know when they hear a, so ba, 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 for instance, they don't know the sequence is over. There could still be another syllable coming that is different. So the idea is that in any case, infants have to wait to realize the sequence is over to be surprised. And they have to wait at least 900 milliseconds, which is the time between two syllables. So we were predicting here a delay of at least 900 milliseconds. It turned out to be a bit longer. So it's 1800 milliseconds, so twice more. But so I think that's the explanation here. It takes much longer because they don't know the sequence is over, so they're still waiting for this different syllable. It never comes, and so at some point they show surprise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.